Hi, how are you? This is Damaris Maria Grossman, and this is the Mindfully Integrative Show. And today we have an amazing guest and mindful chat with Rpbert Yoho. And he is a retired medical doctor, but he's still a doctor. So Dr. Rpbert Yoho, he is a plastic surgeon and world has a large CV, as he explained to me, and an array of things that he can discuss, and as well as an acclaimed author. I think it's 3 books, or is it 4 books? Is that correct?
It's 3.
3. So thank you so much for being on the podcast and show.
Thank you, Damaris. A couple of things, housekeeping. I am Yoho, not yo-yo. As you might imagine, I suffered with yo-yo during my entire youth, right? And sometimes even more recently.
I apologize.
Yo-ho-ho and a bottle of rum, right? So
Yes.
Anyway, we have to make a disclaimer. This is not specific healthcare information for individuals. It's general informational purpose only, and use it as at your own risk. I've spent years researching all this, but I have to do that because of the lawyers. Sorry.
That's very important, right?
And you're welcome to call me Robert.
And disclaimers.
And you're welcome to call me Robert. So I wrote my my primary book about healthcare corruption. And it's called Butchered by Healthcare. And as you can see, there's a guy in a white coat there with a pile of gold at his, and so that's what's happened. And unfortunately, as you have noted during your career, the entire industry is based on money, and it's gotten away from patient ethics. And patient first ethics is what integrative medicine is all about.
Absolutely.
As I understand it. Yeah. I mean, it's the only important thing in healthcare. I mean, it's not do no harm, because some of the therapies carry risks, but it's patient first. Always make your decisions.
Always patient centered.
Yes.
It's listening to what they have to say and not what I want in the algorithm that's been allotted for me.
Really. Just to give you an example of how healthcare has been corrupted, I want to talk briefly about the pharmaceutical companies. And so you're aware that, as measured by their settlements with US federal prosecutors, this is the most criminal industry in history. Okay. So if your listeners want to search right now as they're listening, there's a Wikipedia page which shows their 22 largest settlements. I mean, these are billions of dollars a year. Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, GlaxoSmithKline are at the top of the list. And they've all given out settlements of over $2 billion each. One of them was over $3 billion. And Merck, another company, knowingly slaughtered 50,000 people. They knew the drug caused heart attacks. It was called Vioxx. I think that might have been before your time, but they made money even in the year that they settled the case for billions. And so here's a quote from a Pfizer marketing vice president. He said, "It's scary how many similarities there are between this industry and the mob. Obscene amounts of money, killings and deaths, bribing politicians and others. The difference is all these people in the drug industry look upon themselves as law-abiding citizens." And another CEO of Park Davis, named Harry Loyne, said, "If we put horse manure in a capsule, we could sell it to 95% of these doctors." So that's the way they think about us. And he sold chloramphenicol, which was an antibiotic that killed many children. I'm sure you know that history. So the FDA is supposed to oversee these guys, but half of their budget or more is paid directly by pharma during the patent application process. And this basically turns these agents, they think of the companies as clients rather than entities to be regulated. And if the FDA refuses to approve a drug, they might have trouble making their own payroll. So they become, have you ever heard of this term sock puppet? Have you ever put a sock and teased a little kid with these
supposed to be fun, not negative.
Well, the FDA they are sock puppets of the industry, and their managers have huge salaries waiting for them in the drug industry after they retire. So they work together and they fake the drug approval studies, the patent studies. They use bad statistics. They hide studies that don't promote the drugs. They corrupt foreign research contractors and a whole lot more. And I'm just going to hit you with one more quote. This is Peter Gercha, who is the founder of Cochrane Reviews, which you use. He said, The pervasive scientific misconduct has led to a research literature where one has to dig deeply to find the few gems among all the garbage. So look, I'm sorry to,
There is a lot of excess. I don't know. You'll say garbage. I'll say excess.
well, here's a title of a BMJ, British Medical Journal editorial in July 2021. It was time to assume that healthcare research is fraudulent until proven otherwise. It's not there's a lot, it's the vast majority of it is garbage. And so you've got to be very suspicious. And I'm sure that your colleagues are, who are integrative, are exceedingly suspicious of mainstream stuff that comes out of the mainstream journals. The BMJ actually is the best journal remaining, and it has some integrity. The other ones have washed down the toilet.
It's interesting that you say that. Yeah, I mean,
Be
when you
more
think about it,
suspicious than you already are, Damaris.
yeah, I mean, the interesting part, I guess I put there is more of when you look at these studies, someone's like, as long as they put in a study, they've put in, X amount of, I mean, you hope that these high quality studies are high quality, but you don't always know.
No, they're terrible. Our universities, academics, and medical journals are prostitutes to corporate money. Ghostwriters write 95% of those journal articles that you're looking at, and the authors get huge fees just to put their name on the study. And the companies openly pay the journal editors hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. In government or law, bribes like these could result in firing or criminal prosecution, but in healthcare, it's accepted practice. The payoffs are simply disclosed as COIs, right? Conflicts of interest.
Conflict of interest.
Yeah.
Yep, they are. Well, you hope people are disclosing.
Well, disclosure is not enough. They're still being bribed. I mean, it's crazy. They should basically be fired. They should be fired, and the editors should be horsewhipped for allowing this stuff into the editors know more than anyone else in healthcare. They're enormously sophisticated. They know about the statistical frauds. You know about the relative and absolute risk. That's a routine statistical fraud. And I didn't understand it until a few years ago. I mean, I did when I was.
Oh, well, I did my,
Yeah.
I had to do it in my doctorate work. So yeah, I mean, I definitely learned quite a bit.
The doctors don't know much about this stuff. So.
I mean, and it can be swayed pretty well, and I think I see where you're coming is it can have a sway or an outliers and then the studies can be, it really just depends, like you said. And the other changes when you're looking at a study is that, has anyone reputed it, or just because one thing says this way doesn't mean that there's not another study that would be the opposite of that. It doesn't mean that just because it's science, there's no right or wrong. Like that's why it's science, right? It's a hypothesis.
You know about the study in Lancet a few months ago about hydroxychloroquine that was found to be faked from the start to the finish. It wasn't just outliers or refuted or needed new studies to prove. They faked it from the start to the finish, and it was so obvious that the thing was jerked from Lancet. But as far as I'm concerned, Lancet is a formerly respected medical journal. I have no respect for them at all. Their editors let that slip through. They knew exactly what it was because it was obvious on the face of it. It was
Very
made
straight.
of whole cloth from start to finish.
That's unfortunate. Wow. So talk to me more about your, you were a plastic, you
My
are a
origin
plastic
story.
surgeon. Yeah. Not even just your origin.
My superhero origin
No, I mean, you
story.
really have done a lot. I mean, you have a very lot, but I mean, you've come from being a cosmetic, I'd say plastic, cosmetic or plastic. No, I want to make
cosmetic.
sure.
There is a distinction, but
there's
it's
a
too subtle
distinction.
for this. Yeah.
There is a distinction.
So I
and
did,
ER, but also emergency though. Correct?
Yeah, I was originally an emergency physician, and I trained and became a cosmetic surgeon, and that's what I did the majority of my career. I must have done that for 35 years, and I became, as I matured, as I aged, I got more and more interested in menopause, and because my patients were almost all women, and they were just miserable, and so I studied bioidentical hormones, and which
That's
is
how
part
I
of
initially
integrated
found
medicine.
you. Yes, that's how I initially found you.
And I eventually became certified, and I learned more and more about it. And I eventually, with the cooperation of my patients and with the informed consent, I started prescribing estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, DHEA, melatonin, the whole lot of them. And I just saw miraculous improvements. I mean, these
Changes.
women just, and I had, I was in my early 60s, late 50s, and my majority of my patients were my own age, and that's what you'll find. I asked you about your patient profile, and they're center around your age. And because they, there used to be an adage, never trust anybody over 30. Well, that was when we were 25, right? Well, when you're in your 30s, you tend to have your contacts and so on. So I ended up with a patient practice just full of menopausal women, and they were tough to deal with. And I learned about this menopausal therapy, and I eventually learned that it was tremendously beneficial for health. And the mystery was, why was it all suppressed? You probably know that there are black box warnings on testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone. It's outrageous. These
Yes.
are the most single best drugs in all of medical care. Now, I know that sounds like a big claim, but I'll back that up. We've used these things, well, thyroid for 120 years, testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone for 50, 60, 70 years, 80 years, roughly. We have our clinical experience with these things is enormous. And one huge study, probably the most expensive study ever performed, it cost supposedly $1 billion, called the Women's Health Initiative, threw the whole thing out the window. And this was around 2003. And a furor, a huge uproar, just got everybody off of the bioidentical hormones. And it turns out, when the analysts looked at this study, that it was largely fraudulent, and it was directed by people that had an agenda. And the agenda is always to make more money, and these things are inexpensive. Bioidentical hormones are cheap compared to patented drugs. I mean, there's no way to make $1,000 a month on any of them. And you may think you're getting ripped off by the compounding pharmacy, but it's a bargain compared to some prescription drug for Alzheimer's, which incidentally we could prevent. Now, here's a big claim. You're not going to believe this right off the bat. We could prevent 80% of our Alzheimer's cases if all women got on estrogen at 50. Now, just think about that. Wow. Now, that, I know you're thinking, this is nonsense.
Yeah, I always think the sugar
guy's
one.
A quack.
No.
Okay.
I always think the sugar one. I think I follow Dr. Kristen Dirts too. She's very big into the menopausal. You probably seen her.
So what I did was I put 75 references in an appendix in my hormone book that demonstrate what I just said is true. So you guys are going to have to read it to find out whether I'm full of baloney or not.
I have not read it yet, and I apologize, but I will read it.
Oh, that's okay. It's perfect for you. It's a little guide post for an integrated doctor. And you should attend my mentor's workshops. He's still around. His name's Neil Rozier, Rouzier. And you see this little Mexican shield on the start of on the beginning, on the front.
Yes.
Well, I found a 4-foot high shield in a restaurant in Houston. See that thing? And there's a picture of me. And then I changed it into a book cover, and I put the names of the hormones on it, because this is not just women, and men and women. Hormones dominate their thinking, and they're just swirling around in everybody's brains, right? You just don't realize it until they decline when you're 50 or maybe 45.
I dedefinitely want to go to that. I want to meet your mentor, or at least I want to read, or at least I want to read about him, because I don't know enough about bioidentical.
His health isn't good.
I know that I know the basics, and I've definitely heard some wonderful things. Oh, it's Rosie. It's Rouzier. I think I just.
That's correct.
Okay, I think I have heard wonderful things about hormone therapy, and I do talk more about to individuals, but I do not at this time treat for that, but I would like to at some point.
Nice. So I'll set you up. I'll give you the links and so on and so forth. It'll really change your perception of medicine, because it's the center, in my opinion, of alternate medicine universe. And it's traditional medicine. It's not, what I always say about alternative medicine is that just because there are flaws in aircraft design, it doesn't mean that magic carpets fly. So sorry, that's not directed at you.
I know what you're saying.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, you're alluding that, the medications are good, even though if there is some, Marcus, I think also could it be that because a lot of the negativity came with obviously one pharmaceutical, kind of aspect, but then also people are not looking at how much someone may need, how much, or looking at they're not getting labs on what people's levels are, so they're just incorrectly prescribing
Well,
or giving.
here
Shall I?
the overall perspective is that in America we spend twice what other countries do per person on healthcare. We're at 20% of the gross domestic product. In in Japan, Sweden, France, Italy, Canada, they spend 10% of the gross domestic product, and so it's twice. And there's no academic controversy that 50% of what we do either is harmful or doesn't work at all, right? And that's why people like you are flourishing, because even if you're not more sophisticated, at least you pull everyone away from traditional medicine, which is largely injurious. So I mean, it's an outrageous
I just
situation.
want someone to think beyond the box, right?
Good.
But safely. So I'm always, as I want you to think outside of the box, but do it safely. And I guess I use the word integrative because I want you to see that I don't use alternative anymore. I don't think of alternative because I think they both have a place, right? So I think that's where it's always.
I'm not attacking you or running you down. I'm respectful, and
totally.
So my feeling is that, to get back to the question, is
Right.
that at least half of the drugs that are taken are outrageously bad for people. And I think that there's a whole specialty involved in taking people off these drugs. And I don't know whether you have any nursing home patients, but a lot of these people are on 20/20 medications.
They are.
It's shocking,
especially cardiac or dementia patients.
It's like a dystopian medication farm, and the only people benefiting are the people selling the medication and maybe the doctors who go in there. But even if you took these people off their medications randomly, they would probably benefit. And I've told this to patients who, not patients of mine, but I've told it, and they were cardiac patients who just threw all their medications down the drain. Now, I told them that was a bad idea. They needed to go to their cardiologist and negotiate a little bit. But a lot of them felt better right away. Now, I'm not telling the people on this podcast to throw away all your medicines. Do it with somebody like Damaris's help.
No, you have to do everything obviously within reason, right? My mother, I swear, she only takes one pill, and because she actually listens to me. She actually listens. She really does. I mean, and she's in her 80s, but it took a long time for me to, not just me, but for her to understand and learn, and further. That doesn't mean everybody is like that, right? I mean, there are some patients that will, but you're correct. I bet you a lot of those nursing home patients don't need as many as they have.
Oh, it's not a lot. I mean, there's a guy in Israel that took his nursing home patients off half the drugs, and of course they all did better. The death rates went down. The emergency room visits went down. I mean, we're the most over medicated system in the world in America, and I'm sure Israel's pretty bad too. But it's crazy.
Wow. I can only imagine. I mean, the side effects in all medication, I mean, every medication has a side effect. So
we only study medications individually. They're never studied in combination. And when you've got 5 of them or 10 of them or 20 of them, the side effect interactions are completely unknown. And it's like a new thing every time a doctor looks at one of these people and wonders what the heck is going on. It's probably medication related.
That in itself is a whole other topic. Of the topic of, here I talk about integrative health, but I'm just generally talking about the systems, right? Or trying to integrate the body as a whole. And we haven't even gotten into a conversation about integrating of what people's polypharmacy is. I mean, and the side effects. And I mean, there is some computerized help there that will give you warnings and black box warning, we've talked about, like you say, the black box warnings. But
the black box warnings on the hormones are fraudulent.
You think they're fraudulent? I didn't know
they're
that.
fraudulent.
How do you figure them? How do you figure?
How do I figure?
No, please
go
explain
to
because I don't
Go
know.
to Neil's courses and you'll
Okay.
kind of get it. But the the black box warning, for example, on progesterone
Okay.
was extrapolated from that women's health initiative study, and they used a information that was obtained by studying Provera, which is the chemical imitator of progesterone, right? Not
Right.
bioidentical. And so there there were statistically a few more breast cancers in the we're talking about 6 and 10,000, but I don't even think they had more deaths due to breast cancer, which is the real key metric. And they took that, and somehow the FDA, which is entirely dominated by big pharma, their revenues come straight from big pharma. They decided to eliminate a competitor. That's my speculation. And so they put a black box warning on this. Now for
Mhm.
testosterone, there were a couple of studies where they looked through the wrong end of the telescope. In other words, they tried to find patients who were already on testosterone, who were taking, or who had heart disease. So that's the improper way to do a study. What you do to do a study is you put random people on testosterone and
Exactly.
see if they get heart disease.
Right.
But
Right.
they took those studies, which were completely ruined and applicable to the situation, and they use those as excuse to put a black box warning for stroke and heart disease on testosterone. Well, testosterone decreases stroke and heart disease. I mean, it's well known in the hormone community, and the studies are exhaustive. There are hundreds, or if not thousands, of studies about testosterone, and it's practically all good. I mean, the only warnings about testosterone include things like small testicles, getting it accidentally rubbing the cream on kids and having premature growth cessation and premature maturation, and a few other things. But testosterone is super helpful. And when I treated my women patients, I would just offer them a pellet that lasted 3 months. Now, you may be aware that less than 50% of the prescribed medications in America get actually taken. Even kidney transplant patients throw away their anti-rejection drugs all the time, right? But when you put a little, it's true. I mean, it's crazy. People don't. Now, look, if you can get your mother to listen to you, you have major influence abilities, Damaris. You've got an interpersonal charm and some abilities that most people don't have, because I can't get my kids to listen to me, let alone my wife. You know,
No, it's
so
just a different way. I think it's letting her kind of figure most of it out on her own, but in a roundabout way. She
yeah.
goes, "Oh yeah, that's right. You were talking about that."
Well, you're trying to help, and of course, that's our mission as healthcare providers.
Right.
But I lost my thread.
Oh no, you were
When you're
talking about the
68, you lose your thread
no, you
sometimes.
were talking about the hormonal for testosterone for women
Oh yeah.
and right.
So the great thing about delivering a pellet is they can't decide not to take it. They're stuck with it without doing a surgical procedure. They get
I
3 months of
look,
therapy. And these women, I didn't even charge them. They were paying me thousands of dollars for surgical procedures, and
mhm.
that wasn't even all that profitable, because I gave them the money back in service, service and all this crazy, owning a surgery center and all this stuff. But um, I would just offer them the testosterone pellet, which can be used as a single hormone replacement because it breaks down to estrogen, right? It's great. And so I would offer them if they had symptoms, and you are allowed to do hormone replacement without levels, right? If you get levels, it's better. But the ACOG, American College of Gynecology, has come out saying that if women have symptoms, you can give them hormone replacement, right? And so these women were horribly symptomatic. I mean, they
I mean,
were,
you know that their symptom. I mean, their symptoms are there. Most probably their levels are off, but
yeah. And you can walk into a room with one of these women, and you don't have to know anything about them to understand that they're in menopause. I mean, you just have a look, and an experienced clinician like Damaris can just have a look at them and
that's so
see the
sweet.
menopause. Yeah, well, I mean, you've been doing this stuff for a decade, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that. the menopausal, I think there's just a common thread of menopausal women that you obviously see. It's just tired, fatigued, bloated, thinning, what is it?
Muscle
Not sleeping,
wasting, no
muscle weight, not
sexuality.
no
Yeah.
sexuality, not sleeping, waking up, anxiety,
Yeah.
first depression,
Depression.
depression, yeah, first back and forth. So I don't know. I think that's part of it, or sweating, not sweating.
I I worked with my wife, and she interviewed thousands of patients over the decades, and she was convinced that most of the divorces over 50 have to do with women's menopausal symptoms. Now the
Oh,
men,
wow.
the,
Now talk about a study for that.
yeah, the men, well, you're never going to prove it, but the men, and women will always deny it, right?
Right, right,
there'll be some excuse.
right.
Sorry.
That's funny. No, it's okay.
Well, I
It's funny though.
apologize for that.
No,
Um,
no, no.
but the men, of course, decline as well. Now we're not immune, but what we do is we have the gradual dwindles over decades, right? The women fall off a cliff at 50
Yeah.
because they use their last egg. You guys have what, 250 eggs or something like that, and each egg represents a cycle. And then you come up to the last egg, and you have had your last cycle, and then the hormones don't function as well. So you start having symptoms around 45, and progesterone is usually the replacement that's best, because you still have adequate estrogen and you need progesterone opposition. And then at 50, you need ideally to get supplemented for all the hormones. But if you want to do it on the cheap, you can give the women just testosterone, and that's fine. It's perfectly appropriate. It's accepted. There are no known problems with it virtually, for the tiny doses that women need. And if you really want it inexpensively, if you want to do it inexpensively, injectable testosterone costs about $1 a week for women. It's nothing. It's absolutely nothing. And so anyway,
Well, that's a whole other. I mean, I didn't even realize it was that cheap.
these
So
women
when,
would come back and just do backflips. I mean, they would feel so good. And it wasn't because they got a new set of boobs. They'd be happy with that usually. They're not always happy with that, or that they got liposuction or a facelift or whatever. Those require, convalescent, but they would feel so much better to have some of their menopause symptoms relieved. And it happens in 2 weeks, a week or two.
and when you saw these results, I mean, 2 weeks, that's significant. I didn't know it was that quickly with the
Oh,
bioidentical.
it can happen shorter than that sometimes.
And have you I mean, not at this time you don't practice, but when you did practice with giving these, you started doing that toward the end of your with your patients, that you started
Well,
to realize
the
after
last decade.
last
Now,
decade you
see,
felt like, okay, I need to change something in these because I see so many patients and they're obviously complaining about the same thing, even
well,
though you've made them beautiful.
the average plastic surgeon operates on a string of depressed and anxious and menopausal people their whole careers, and ignores the background for that. And I felt that it was unethical to do that. I felt that I should learn about this stuff. And I had been going to these courses with Dr. Rosier for several decades, and I didn't do it much. But the last 10 years that I worked, I became very interested in it and acquired a fairly decent experience prescribing I never made any money on it. I never made any money on it, but it was one of the best things that I did in my clinical
So
practice. And
your
yeah,
satisfaction that you've helped your patients.
it's very satisfying.
I mean, there's money obviously in medicine, but as you have written a whole book on in its own entity, but the fact that you're able to, care for them beyond just the
So
physical.
my experience is more limited than people that do this full time. And if you get into it, this will colonize your practice. You'll do it all the time because you'll see it. And you'll have a much bigger experience than I ever did. But I got so interested in it. I wrote my book about it because it was so fascinating. And the thing that was most interesting was I couldn't figure out why these drugs were being run down so avidly, because I thought in my naivete that the patients come first. But that's not the case at all anymore. I mean, we're being butchered by healthcare. And, it almost takes physician level expertise to navigate our healthcare system. There are a couple of things that we have now that we didn't have 2 years ago, though. You know what those are, don't you? The first thing is you can go anywhere you want and get a virtual consultation. Trump did an executive order and said we can we can no longer be censured by medical boards for doing first visit care over the phone, right? And if you don't know about that, you should,
Well, I'm a big telehealth provider, so I
yeah,
have about 10. I'm trying to get all 50 states in my licensing, but I'm a big proponent of telehealth, and because when I see patients online and even on these Zoom calls and such, I learn more about them than I did in my 10-minute call in a urgent or a 60 patient, 100 patient clinic.
yeah. Well, I don't think you don't need a license to prescribe across state lines, a license in that other state, unless it's a scheduled drug, right? You can call in.
Oh, unless it's a scheduled drug, but if it's
Yes.
a basic, right, if it's supplements or and such, then no, then those are not. But if it's a scheduled, yeah, I would.
And strangely enough, testosterone, which is almost harmless, that is a scheduled drug.
It is. Yeah.
That's a political football that I described in my Hormone Secrets book.
Yeah, that definitely is on the list. But so your feel with you're happy with the way that it's changed with being able to see patients
Oh yeah,
online. Yeah,
that's one of the two.
Yeah,
big
because I mean, I'm
things.
a big benefit of that. Okay, tell me the second.
The second one is the patient advocacy groups, and that, I mean, you can find patients that know as much about if you have an oddball disease, if you have a certain kind of cancer, you can network with these people online and you can get free advice from very bright patients that have been through the whole gamut of whatever chemo is available or anything else. And so those are two very positive trends in basically a mud bath of negativity. I mean, it's, healthcare is just a freaking mess. And people like you are trying to drag the narrative around in a positive direction. But I mean,
yes, I'm trying to try to keep it the most positive middle, as I shall say, to keep, but there's plenty out there that you can see available.
Yeah.
On the
So you
internet,
prescribe thyroid, don't you?
I do sometimes.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, patients need it. I mean, it's just, I mean,
the integrative doctors I know prescribe thyroid. They think that a third to 40% of women over 40 benefit from thyroid. And
they either have Hashimoto's or they need a T3, T4. Like, I mean, I look at the whole, like the full panel. So I'm not just going to look at just the TSH. I usually T3, T4, that, the antibodies. So I look at the whole, I try to look at the larger panel of it. But yeah.
The TSH is an imprecise and very difficult measure because it's the inverse of the blood levels, right? And you, of course, are very familiar with that, but it's in the opinion of many of the integrative people I know, it's almost completely useless unless it's a little bit high, in which basically it has to be completely suppressed or very low values for any utility to the patient to accrue. And the biggest need for prescribing thyroid is not for people who have Hashimoto's or any other standard diagnosis, but it's a subclinical hypothyroid.
Subclinical, yeah, I've seen a few of those. Yeah, and it's
30% of the women over 40 you see, Damaris. It's a huge number in the opinion of many people. Yeah. So do you use porcine thyroid?
So it depends upon the patient. So majority of the time I have not. I mean, I haven't seen given it enough, but I have done both or the compounds, but there's only a few pharmacies that do the compound but what do you recommend? Have you seen?
Well, that's a good answer because it does depend on the circumstance. And I think most people do very well with a much more powerful porcine because it has a T3, and you have those people who can't convert the T4 into T3. There's a lot of them out there, a lot
T3,
more
T4.
than.
Yeah. Are you checking more like on the Armor or like, well, we're specifics,
Armor,
but like yes, or
these brands change, and
whatever the brand. But you mean the portions? I know what you're saying.
Yeah, Armor is
Generics.
one of the brands that used to be a standard, but there are questions about its potency. It was purchased by a T4 company. I mean, it's really crazy. This stuff changes.
The compounds work very well. So
the compounds are fine. Yeah.
Oh, so what when I referenced that, in addition to the, so you're saying subclinical, you have these patients menopausal, you're doing this bioidentical hormone replacement, and then you're saying in addition to that, you're also giving them thyroid medications.
Integrative physicians are believe in trials of therapy, right?
We
So
do.
this is very important
We do.
concept.
We do.
And so if the patient has fatigue and so on, I mean, I'm sure that you as a routine attempt to get the labs. And for thyroid, it's very tricky. It's unlike the other hormones. And it does help to get the labs, as many labs as you can, even a TSH, if you believe in the religion of TSH. I didn't get TSHs because they it gives the endocrinologist something to be critical of. You know, in other words, they say, well, you didn't rely on the TSH. It wasn't this or it wasn't that. It's almost a useless test. But free T3 alone is probably the best single test, and that tells you where the most potent of the thyroid hormones lives. So if you get a free T3, you push those up towards the top, and you watch the patient as integrative doctors do. Other doctors just watch the labs. I mean, it's crazy. The
We do.
endocrinologists
They
are
don't even
laboratory.
ask. You're like, oh, how are you
Yeah,
feeling today? And you obviously see it with using your bio, even just the hormonal stuff. You, if you've given them a pill and it's not working, then you have to see what, you know, you transition to something. You
yeah.
discuss it.
Watch the patient.
Watch the
So
patient. Wow,
yeah,
isn't that interesting? You watch and talk with them.
yeah, I know. It's crazy. It's
So
crazy.
it's so different, so different. Um, well, I mean, you've already discussed so much with me. Is there anything additional? I mean, there's plenty for people to reach out to you, but you'd like to add in for today, uh, before I cut you short? I know that we have plenty more to discuss, but I'd love for you to be back on the podcast because I think there's another, I could put you in for another hour.
Well, that's generous, Damaris. I'd love to come back. I want to emphasize that because I have realistic and many negative opinions about healthcare, that doesn't mean that we don't do miracles every day. And you can't abandon Western healthcare because it's been corrupted by money or the studies are ruined. We still have to look through the weeds and try to treat our patients and do the best job we possibly can to put their needs first.
Beautifully said.
Okay, well, that's generous of you. Thank you,
That's
Damaris.
it's honest. It's an honest and truthful statement. Shall I say? I call it one of those truth bombs. I'd love for them to reach out to you, and I'll put the information into the show notes. Would you like to tell them, those listening and watching, your books that you have written to the audience?
Sure. Butchered by Healthcare, with that inflammatory cover, that's on Amazon and other places, and you can get the ebooks of these two for $3 a piece. This is not a profitable venture. And then Hormone Secrets, you got to get the one with that strange cover. There are other books about hormone secrets out there. And then my website is rpbertyohoauthor.com. I am on absolutely no social media. You know, I'm 68. What do I know about Facebook, right?
It's probably best for you not to be with all of this nowadays. Let me tell
Yeah.
you, it's a little hectic. It's a lot. It's so, I mean, I
Facebook's
haven't, but it's a lot.
Facebook stock shares dropped 25%. I wish they would drop 98%. That was in the last 2 or 3 days.
I can imagine. I can imagine. Well, I appreciate you being on the show. I appreciate your time and all of your wealth of knowledge. Thank you again. There's plenty more to talk here. We've only just scratched the surface. So I think we're going to see an upcoming show in the next, few months down the road, and maybe even a part of our, conference/summit that I'm going to do at some point. So I'll keep you posted. And thank you again for being on the Mindfully Integrative Show. And thanks those that are listening today, and whatever time it is for you, make sure you find a mindful way each and every day.